This is 1968, Television, Part 2. 50 years ago, there wasn't a smorgasbord of television choices that there are today. Back then, the family might gather together to watch the one and only TV in the house. With any luck, it was color. But with only 3 networks to turn to, ABC, NBC, and CBS, one might think audiences were limited not only in their choices, but their exposure. In reality, though, nothing could have been further from the truth. In 1968, television had the power to bring the war home for viewers in ways it had never done before. The political, civil, and social unrest often shaped how we saw the world. But there was another component to television in 1968, the power to entertain and sometimes even to heal. It was a diversion, an escape route, and for the many overwhelmed by the reality of the times, a means to a better life. Some believe it's responsible for Richard Nixon becoming president.
Live from New York!
And some say it's how Saturday Night Live came to be.
NBC presents Rowan and Laugh-In's Martin.
But no one can dispute the indelible mark NBC's Laugh-In left on television history since Season 1 hit the airwaves in the winter of 1968.
This show is going to be a different show. It's not a regular variety show.
Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, anchored by Dan Rowan and Dick Martin, combined classic variety show shtick with the vaudeville stage, with stand-up comedy, and the trick was editing.
Poo-poo. Blue.
It was funny because it was fast, it was speedy, and stylized. The show was stylized. It had a different look. That's what made it a success.
It was electronic, and it was visual, totally visual. You couldn't walk out of the room on ours, because you wouldn't know what was going on.
But it wasn't just the visuals or the celebrity cameos.
I am surprised at NBC.
There was a social commentary.
George is so square. He thinks that Planned Parenthood means living with his mother.
We came on with funny comments about outrageous subjects, and we did it in rapid succession, so we didn't lay on anything for like 5 minutes. Everything was like 20 seconds, 30 seconds. So it went by, and if you were offended for such a brief period of time that we went on to something else.
We were doing a satirical show. We were making fun. There were no sacred cows with us. We hit the left, we hit the right, whatever it was, they got a shot one way or the other, so that we sort of separated ourselves from taking a political stance or a sociological stance, and we just took a funny look at society as it existed.
The show's name, Laugh-In, a take on the 1960s hippies' love-ins and sit-ins, was a topical comedy hour, or like the 60s themselves, almost anything goes.
There are ugly people out there, but they're spread out.
They had a repertory company of comics, and they would use them in different sketches, and then they had a joke wall where they would all come out and say one-liners and vanish. They had party scenes where they would all show up at the party.
What do you think of red china?
On a blue tablecloth, I think it looks lovely.
Politically, the country was torn apart, so we were talking about all kinds of issues then that were normally not discussed in variety shows.
I got an idea. Let's get the Vietnam War to sign with William Morris. That'll keep it off the front pages.
We were the hottest show on television. We broke the ground for a lot of television. We were the first ones that really took what was current and happening and put it in front of the audience.
Like that time in September 1968, when Richard Nixon was running for president. His friend and supporter, Paul Keyes, who also happened to be a writer on Laugh-In, suggested Nixon could soften his image by appearing on the #1 rated show.
At that time, no presidential candidate had ever appeared on a comedy show.
Nixon agreed, lending his face and voice to one of the show's signature gag lines.
Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me.
We got Richard Nixon at CBS. He was doing a press conference, and we got 6 takes to get him to say, "Sock it to me," and smile. He was not a big smiler, Mr. Nixon, if you remember. This comedy thing is new to me. Take two, you know. And so we got a take that we could use, and we ran back to NBC, put that tape into the next show, went on the air, and it was a hit.
Sock it to me?
Mr. Nixon said he thought that's probably what got him elected, and I've had to live with that.
The show's catchphrases caught on too.
Very interesting. Here comes the judge. Here comes the judge.
They test the censor's patience by getting close to the edge.
You bet your sweet bippy I would.
They said, what is a bippy? We said, well, it's a little bip.
As part of its reputation, played very much on the double entendre type censorship issues. And they would push it as far as they could, and so that gave it a sense of a naughty night out for people watching at home.
You can do anything, you can say anything you want to say. Anything that the censors and NBC and the sponsors will allow you to say.
The talented cast included Ruth Buzzy, Gary Owens, Artie Johnson, Joanne Worley, Henry Gibson, and Judy Carn, just to name a few. Lily Tomlin would become a household name. And then there was 20-year-old future Oscar winner Goldie Hawn, who would invariably mess up her lines, just the way the producers liked it.
Most of what I did on Laugh-In, seriously, is I arranged for the mistakes.
And now, take it away, Goldie.
When Goldie blew a line, we never gave her a script anymore, you know? And when it happened, it was gold. If it didn't happen, we didn't use it.
George, he would lie to me, basically. He'd lie to me. He'd tell me I was going to say one thing and then put something else on the teleprompter. I asked him to do it again, and he said, no, that's okay, Goldie, just keep on going. We had the hula hoop and the twist. Go-go dancing and rock and roll. I was a teenager. I was wearing a fringe dress and dancing the campy show. Oh my God! Wait, let me do this again. Let me do it right.
You're gonna do it right.
Okay.
At an event celebrating the show's 25th anniversary, the Laugh-In alumni revealed the reasons for the show's long-lasting cultural impact.
Worked so well because they had so many writers. And I really feel that was it, besides them being brilliant writers. And of course, we were brilliant, you know. What can I say?
We had a chance to study with the masters of comedy. So it was like clerking at the Supreme Court, except you had a different judge every show you went into.
It was completely honest. It said things in an outrageous way.
It was the age when we lost our innocence and people wanted a release valve. They wanted something to laugh at. They felt badly about the war, the economy. They wanted to laugh.
Up next, it may have still been a man's world, but in the blink of an eye, one 2,000-year-old Jeannie made it known she was a master of everyone's domain.
It was a fantasy. It was magic. It was NASA.
It was NBC's I Dream of Jeannie, a 1965 sitcom about a genie released from a bottle by an astronaut who becomes, according to Jeannie rules, her master. It was the ultimate in escapist TV.
I guess you could say escape. There are many words you could use. As a matter of fact, I've been thanked by people in their 40s, 50s, who said, you saved my life. One in particular, I'm remembering in New York, makeup artist. He said, if I didn't have your show to look at every night, I wouldn't be here. I've heard stories, you know, about parents and going off the deep end and children being left. Escape? Maybe they needed it. They needed a little escape.
Ooh, thou must relax.
The show about a genie named Jeannie, who'd regularly use her magic powers to bail out Larry Hagman's Major Nelson from some sort of work jam, usually of her own doing, was a perfect respite from the Vietnam War, turmoil, and general unrest of the 60s.
The minute you get off the set, reality hits you in the face, and you know what's going on, and you're deeply involved, but not on the set.
Eden admits, even as an up-and-coming star, she did her best to shut out the noise and discrimination that was so prevalent in those days.
It was a man's world. There's no way you could get around it. I knew that women didn't have the opportunity to do the things that the men were doing. They weren't heads of studios. They weren't directors, and there aren't many now either. I did not make as much as my male counterparts in film. I didn't think that they didn't deserve it. I kept thinking I deserve more, and I will get it.
Years later, Eden's role as Jeannie and her practice of calling Major Nelson master, as Jeannies are wont to do, has often been challenged, especially since the role of women in our culture was at a turning point.
Now you go visit your relatives and have a good time. I'll miss you.
Yes, Master, you will.
The funny thing about the question of just using the word master, the first time you hear it, you go, whoa, wait, that's kind of weird. But then you realize, as with so much of humor, what is said is different from what's happening.
I don't feel it set back women's rights because, come on, she's not a housewife. She's an entity. She's smoke. It's magic. From the minute she came out of that bottle and looked at him, oh boy, this is my job, you know. This isn't a little homebody that stays there and says, oh, master, when he came home because he paid the bills. This is somebody who was really on top of it, who was smart, had a gift, but yeah, she adored him.
Did she set the cause of women back at all? I have no idea if that's the case, but I can tell you that there are people who admired, enjoyed, respected the character. She advanced the fact that it's good to have a sharp, in-control woman as the lead of the series.
Of course, Jeannie's good looks and skimpy costume may have something to do with viewers flocking to the show, but Eden has always downplayed that angle.
Because I was wearing harem pants and it was that kind of thing, I think you're conditioned to think that's sexy. It is, but it's not the way Jeannie should be. You know, she should be funny and caring.
I saw nothing wrong with the costume. Also, remember, Laugh-In was on at that time. There were a lot of very naked ladies on that show. It wasn't that off the radar.
But Laugh-In producer George Schlatter thought Jeannie's harem costume didn't reveal enough, suggesting his controversial show would be the perfect place to expose her never-before-seen belly button on national TV.
We had a writer for the Hollywood Reporter that would come down on the set all the time, and he'd joke and laugh with me and say, I don't believe you have one. So it was a joke, and he wrote about it, and it got picked up by other people. And everyone was talking about my belly button, for heaven's sakes. So George Schlatter wanted to premiere it on Laugh-In.
Soon, the topic of Jeannie's belly button became a hot button for the network.
Well, all of a sudden, NBC realized I had a belly button. And they said, she's not going to premiere her belly button. And what's more, she can't show it on her show. Now, I had never really shown it, except that it was sort of riding on my hips, that outfit. And if I put my arms up or down, so every once in a while it'd peek out, but it wasn't there all the time. Well, we had people scrutinizing my belly button. It became really stupid. My pantaloons, which were sheer to begin with, they put a lining in so they couldn't see my legs. I don't get it, but they did.
Jeannie and her belly button never did appear on Laugh-In. But Eden believes if it weren't for her midsection and the media who couldn't get enough of the subject, she and her show wouldn't have had the shelf life they have.
I think actors want to be strongly identified. They really do. They holler about it a lot, but if you're not strongly identified with a character or a part, who's going to know you?
Coming up, soap operas. The one TV genre that never seems to go out of style, no matter the decade.
Our country was, in 1968, bubbling with unrest.
Yes, it seemed like the country was finished.
Vietnam War, women's lib, black power,
The whole black nation has to be put together as a black army.
closed down the university, protest this. 1968, wow, what a year. It was a killer year.
But I got a contract on Days of Our Lives, so I thought, there's hope.
Hope. It's always been the collective mindset of soap opera fans.
Soaps are magical. It's a story, and everybody loves a story.
The characters were men in suits, lawyers, doctors. The ladies did not have jobs. They had emotional problems, but not jobs.
Called soaps for the soap manufacturers who sponsored them, the programs have been a pop culture staple since 1930. Soaps often have the same premise, a serial drama about relationships, with a family as a centerpiece.
It's the ongoing story. What happened today?
We're in their home 5 days a week. A real viewer doesn't want to miss one minute of it.
For Days of Our Lives fans, it's a relationship that's endured for half a century, ever since the NBC television drama about the lives and loves of the people of Salem premiered in 1965.
Like sand through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives.
3 years later, as the soap opera genre soared in popularity, Susan Seaforth Hayes would take over the role of teenager Julie Olson. 5 decades later, she's still playing Julie.
My character has gone from being a tempestuous teenager, a tempestuous, unhappily married young woman, a tempestuous woman involved in an affair.
I don't care if you're duetted with Placido Domingo at the Met. That doesn't qualify you to run a successful nightclub.
To being a somewhat less tempestuous grandmother, but she still seems to hold grudges because it's a soap opera.
Doug and Julie's on-again, off-again relationship was one reason viewers kept tuning in. They were even honored as a first super couple of daytime.
Marry me, Julie. Third time is a charm.
Their real-life love lasting in a very non-soap-like way since 1974. Dozens of soap operas have come and gone, but ABC's General Hospital, which recently aired its 14,000th episode, is in the record books.
When we did the pilot, I don't think anyone had any idea at all that it would last this long.
I'm gonna fix it.
Fix this. Okay?
Currently the longest-running scripted drama and the longest-running American soap still in production. GH premiered in 1963 and just celebrated its 55th anniversary.
If the show is entertaining, exciting, and real, people will want to watch.
And watch they have, as General Hospital and other daytime dramas became an integral part of viewers' daily lives.
There's something very comforting about remembering not just what the characters were doing 20 years ago, but remembering what you were doing when you were watching them 20 years ago.
One soap, Dark Shadows, which premiered in '66, was different from all the rest. Geared toward the after-school crowd, ABC's gothic soap incorporated supernatural elements including vampires, werewolves, and time travel.
In the world of soap operas, there really wasn't anything like it. Not this deliberate, fully realized pacing of a gothic novel.
There has to be more! More!
It would also reflect socially relevant issues, including women's rights, with the character of Angelique.
They admired the character because she had tremendous strength. You know, she was coming in the beginnings of the whole women's movement, and she was very independent.
How peaceful you look, Alexis. And I'm so grateful to you for making my plan work out so perfectly.
From a female standpoint, it wasn't just submissive roles and serving coffee and this and that.
After the character of Barnabas Collins, a tormented vampire was introduced, Dark Shadows became a cult hit.
My goal was to make a vampire believable by making him human.
He didn't want to be a vampire. He was forced to be a vampire. The idea of someone in hiding and someone that didn't want to be what they were, that was also a shift of people actually talking about things that, were not polite conversation.
But the Hayes say when Days of Our Lives tried emulating real-life storylines like interracial and gay relationships, it didn't always go over well with viewers or censors.
Generally, the networks have been afraid of losing audience over truly timely stories. In the 1960s, of course, there was a censor in the booth every day.
Yes.
She wore a little navy blue suit.
Yeah, don't say that.
Don't say that.
Still, Susan Seaforth Hayes has to give credit for one topic that's always been at the forefront of daytime TV.
Women's rights, women's health, this has always been very big on daytime television. Many's a viewer will come to an actress and say, well, I didn't know about such and such and such and such a disease, and then I went to the doctor, because if you hadn't been, I would be dead today, thanks. This is huge. We've always tried to be on the forefront of those female issues.
And good for the writers that do that.
But through the decades, viewers have remained invested.
Many of our viewers started watching with their mother, many with their grandmother. When they meet us, it takes them back to those moments. Days of Our Lives is a family, and it becomes the family of the viewer.
It's a responsibility this legendary soap couple doesn't take lightly.
We have thousands of hours of intimacy with the viewer. It's the essence of family and connection, which is the real link that ties Days of Our Lives to its viewers.
Still to come, for those despondent over the unrest of the 60s, CBS had the perfect remedy. Its name? The Andy Griffith Show. It was a sleepy town with simple problems, and it couldn't have been further from reality. But as a fictional setting for the Andy Griffith Show, Mayberry was 60s utopia, where jail cells sat mostly empty, and there was always a lesson to be learned. The Andy Griffith Show was Southern comfort in a time and place it was sorely needed.
If you look at the whole history of television and before that radio entertainment, so much of it is pure escapism, because that's how you always tuned in TV, to look for something that's distracting, something that's entertaining, something that's fun, something that caps off the day.
For millions of Americans in the 60s, the Andy Griffith Show on CBS was a destination of choice.
Sorry I'm late, Andy. I've heard about it. I knew you'd need somebody to cover you. All right, where'd they go? What's the scoop, Gomer?
The purpose of television entertainment for most of the 60s was not to support the causes that were becoming increasingly popular in terms of civil rights, women's liberation, anti-war, as it was just to help you forget all that.
Time in history was difficult then, and that little half hour was a kind of a never-never place.
A wholesome sitcom about Sheriff Andy Taylor, raising his son Opie with the help of his aunt, and at work, managing his inept deputy Barney Fife and the other nutty townspeople of Mayberry, stood in stark contrast to the real world, but seemed to be exactly what audiences wanted.
There's no sickness, there's no violence. It's just fun and good wishes and positive lifestyles that you don't have in television today.
It gave people a feeling of safety. That's why the show was so successful. Mayberry in the 60s did not exist. There were very few Mayberries in this country. People loved thinking there was.
It's very unique. You're just trying to be as entertaining as it could be, but never at the price of the sort of the central humanity of the characters. I think that's why it's endured. Mayberry, even then, was kind of a timeless place.
Considered one of the most beloved comedies of all time, Opie, played by Ron Howard, credits Griffith's Southern charm and the show's wholesome family values for its popularity.
He defined a very particular way of communicating with audiences, not only about the South, but sort of about American life. And it was so unique that it's endured.
That distinctive quality made it a hit with viewers, never falling below 7th place in the ratings. In its 8th and final season in 1968, the sitcom was a #1 show in the country.
We knew we had a good show. We were very proud of what we did, right from the beginning, but certainly not to this extent.
The show's iconic theme song would even be a factor in helping cement its status as the ultimate in escapist TV.
That's my favorite. There's something so uplifting about that song.
The Andy Griffith Show would spawn 2 spin-offs, Mayberry RFD and Gomer Pyle USMC, both hits. But neither can compare to the original or its fan base,
I gotta tell you one thing, it's better than soap operas.
or the fact that it's been in syndication for over half a century.
My wife has a friend who said she watches Andy Griffith every night so she knows the world is going to be okay.
We never started out to do something that would be sociologically or psychologically important.
Yeah, I guess you're just about the best friend the guy ever had.
And while a crime-fighting comedy set in a rural town with almost no crime and a bunch of likable balloony characters were far removed from the chaos of the times, it's no wonder the Andy Griffith Show struck a chord then and still resonates so many years later.
It doesn't reflect the turmoil of the 60s. It aspires to recall kind of what it can mean when a community really pulls together. And the fact that the show has endured and continues to endure is an absolute testament to the possibility that any medium can be transformed into a real art, enduring art, when an individual voice finds the right sort of platform and setting. And I really think that's what happened with the Andy Griffith Show.
Coming up next, the Wild West, Hooterville, and Gotham City were just some of the hot spots for detaching from the difficulties of real life. As a genre of entertainment that's as old as the hills, Westerns were the perfect place to go for someone hoping to get out of Dodge, or even for someone looking to escape the harsh reality of the real world.
They were further from the reality that we were all living in than other shows were, and that may have elevated the escapism and the romanticism of the story and the reaction in the audience.
Set in the Old West in the 18 and 1900s, Westerns like Bonanza and Gunsmoke offered good old-fashioned values, with the occasional good old-fashioned shootout. Though they reached their peak in the late 50s, they were still going strong a decade later.
It was why most of television of the 60s in terms of entertainment was so popular, because it was simple at a time when life itself was so complicated. And at the end of each hour, the good guys usually prevailed.
I said stop and turn around and drop your gun belt, and then come down.
I think that people always enjoy seeing some of the old traditional values. Although, of course, I think that, see, as far as that technique, that's still a technique that's used today by law officers. In other words, the idea is don't draw too quick and shoot too fast. Wait and get the first shot, make that count, you know. And that principle, I think, still holds today.
Both Bonanza and Gunsmoke address the issues of the day, albeit through a Western lens.
Both of them in the 60s were doing programs where they looked at the rights of Native Americans and how they were being treated as sort of an allegory for civil rights and how African Americans were being treated, and did things about women not being able to do stuff. They pushed a lot of the same buttons, but by saying, okay, we're looking at this in the 1860s, 1870s, then it's okay.
Where's your gun, Marshal?
And if some Westerns were reflecting on the politics of the day, at the same time, other shows had a completely different approach when it came to coping with the outside world.
Late 60s on television entertainment, a lot of rural-centered, suburban-centered, sexually innocent, politically innocent time. I always wondered if that was one of the things that threw us off, is that you turn on the news and you got one reality, and then you watched something else on television and you got no reality.
CBS's Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, and Green Acres were three closely related country cousin-type comedies that fit the no-reality bill set in rural communities. These shows depicted simpler times without reflecting the news of the day. The Beverly Hillbillies came first, premiering in 1962. It was about a country bumpkin family, the Clampetts, who accidentally struck it rich.
Oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea.
So they packed up and moved out to Beverly Hills, that is.
Friendly show. People are looking for escape.
And Paul Henning, the creator, gave it to them for 9 seasons.
And my understanding was the Beverly Hillbillies was like his special little baby. That's where he started off, something that he always wanted to do.
It was and still is one of the most popular shows of all time.
It was the escapist of the 60s. But the interesting thing about those shows is that if you watch the Beverly Hillbillies, they aren't really making fun of the hillbillies. There's a lot of jokes that are aimed at their expense, but they are always smarter than the so-called city slickers around them. And that's the moral there.
Listen, where's the nearest airfield?
Airfield?
You know, Granny, that's one of them there fields sets up in the air.
People would always say that was the American dream, and that's how they always identified us as American dream.
The next year, Paul Henning came up with another winner.
Petticoat Junction.
Petticoat Junction, about a widow, her uncle, and 3 daughters who run the Shady Rest Hotel, with the help of the local train that keeps them in business. Henning's daughter Linda played Betty Jo, the youngest daughter on the show.
All the salesmen are aboard, Charlie.
He got the idea from my mother's family. Her grandparents had a little hotel in Eldon, Missouri, and there was a little train that came by, and salesmen would stay in their hotel, and my great-grandmother would cook these amazing meals, from what my mother tells me, and for like 50 cents, you could eat this banquet of stuff. So she told Daddy about it, and he was kind of under the gun to come up with an idea, because Beverly Hillbillies, which was his show, had been so popular that he thought, oh God, what am I gonna say? What can I do? And used it.
Mr. Bedloe, the folks in this valley haven't got much money. But as long as that little train runs, they'll never be poor.
That's the Hooverville Cannonball.
Probably the most incredible decade of my life was the 60s. Going from being a teenager to being a young woman, to doing the show, to politically what was happening in the world, to everything else. It was really an incredible learning experience.
The show's simplicity and lightheartedness resonated with viewers.
We were a show that appealed basically to middle America. They'd always say, well, the coasts weren't as fond of us as the people in the middle, but they were the people who watched TV. We would get letters from servicemen. I remember one in particular. This guy was in a foxhole in the middle of the Vietnam War being shot at, and he's writing this letter to me. That's a lot of responsibility. And we wanted to try to keep it light and entertaining, because if servicemen saw it, we wanted them to think of their homes and to be happy. All of those shows in the 60s were a way of people just being able to watch TV and get away from all of the other problems and the troubles, no matter what was going on in their lives.
The success of Petticoat Junction led to another Paul Henning-inspired sitcom, Green Acres. Like Petticoat Junction, it was set in Hooterville and was similar to the Beverly Hillbillies in that it was about moving A wealthy couple from a ritzy urban setting pack up and move to a farm, the Beverly Hillbillies, in reverse.
Fresh air.
Times Square.
You are my wife?
Goodbye, City Life.
Eddie Albert plays the attorney who wants to move from the big city to the country, and his spouse, Lisa, who loves the city, does not want to go to the country. She wants to stay in the city. Well, the twist there is the person who absolutely, without a doubt, perfectly adapts to the country is Lisa.
Sometimes the characters would do a crossover, appearing as the same person on one or more of the country cousin shows. In a 1968 episode of the Beverly Hillbillies, the Clampetts, Petticoat Junction characters, and Lisa and Eddie of Green Acres even shared Thanksgiving dinner together. But despite the good feelings and the good ratings, by the early 70s, CBS decided to cancel the shows.
One of the cast members of one of the shows says that CBS canceled every show with a tree in it. And that's sort of what happened. Even though it was very, very popular, it skewed very old, and CBS, by all of a sudden wanting to go with something like All in the Family, wanted to go after younger viewers.
I think a lot of the people who watched us were very upset by it. I think that's one of the reasons they still watch the shows in reruns, because they miss that kind of thing. It's escapist.
But if there's one show that put the kapow in escapist TV, it would have to be ABC's Batman. Born from the pages of comic books, the 1966 series starred the beloved caped crusader, Batman, and his sidekick, Robin, who protect Gotham City against larger-than-life villainous criminals. The action show was a colorful, campy comedy that did superhero-like ratings when it premiered in 1966.
They called it campy, which was kind of, I guess, meaning affected and posy, because that's what reality and escapism is all about.
I sat in front of my little TV at home, and I watched the show, and all of a sudden, the color, wow. That theme music, da-na-na-na-na-na-na, I mean, wow, was that inspiring. The Batmobile, and the fire coming out of the back, and the fight scenes with the pows and zaps. I said, this is really good. I don't know if it's gonna be a success, but this is really good.
Audiences agreed, tuning in to see millionaire Bruce Wayne and his young ward Dick Grayson. Secretly, the dynamic duo get the familiar distress call from Commissioner Gordon seeking the caped crusaders' help in stopping whichever villain was wreaking havoc on Gotham City.
Batman was one of a kind. It was the first show in television history that, in my opinion, the actors played with the audience. We used to say that we put on our tights to put on the world.
Never forget that television is there for entertainment. The embodiment of entertainment, especially in the 60s, was what I would call fantasy escapist. It's just fun.
Batman ended in 1968 after 120 episodes. Its impact still felt more than 5 decades later.
Holy Titanic, Batman, we're going down for the last time.
Generally, anything Batman is kind of a cultural phenomenon, in our country at least, and I think an accessible kind of superhero character.
I can't tell you how many thousands of people over the years say to me things like, well, you know, I grew up watching Batman. I learned valuable lessons. And now I'm in law enforcement. And I made something of my life when I thought that maybe there was a time that I wasn't going to become anything.
It's the child, I think, that we all keep within us. Something that is different and exciting and thrilling, and you want it to continue and continue. That's the closest I can come to explaining the phenomenon of Batman.
Coming up, a news magazine show that brought the realities of life up close and in depth. It was 60 Minutes.
Just tell the story as best you can.
It's been the hallmark of the program, and as enduring as that stopwatch. One of the longest running and most successful shows on TV, CBS's 60 Minutes debuted in 1968, and even after 5 decades, it keeps on ticking.
60 Minutes was the right show at the right time, but it's amazing. There aren't that many programs that have held on to their own identity as well as their legacy for so long.
It was a brainchild of Don Hewitt, a pioneer in the field of television and a CBS executive. He envisioned 60 Minutes as a new type of television, borrowing from a different media.
You gotta do what Life magazine does. You gotta put a cover with it. You gotta put personality.
And when 60 Minutes premiered, September 24th, 1968, the show's original hosts, Harry Reisner and Mike Wallace, used that same language to describe it as a kind of a magazine for television.
Originally, it was going to be Harry Reisner, all by himself. And they decided he was too nice a guy. They needed the opposite, so they came to me.
The show reported in depth on 3 separate topics, and with the endless supply of highly charged issues of the day, there was no shortage of stories.
60 Minutes was one of the few other places to go besides the evening news to get an amplification of the news that you were watching.
It is no accident that this is the time in the news history that a program like that really came to its own.
While not an overnight success, Hewitt knew what it took to make good TV.
I said the secret of 60 Minutes is to find people who can tell their own story better than you can. And your job is to help them tell it.
Don Hewitt always said that all good journalism begins, tell me a story. They were out there, finding the bad guys and using a lot of kind of dramatic techniques to tell us who the bad guys were. And he used to say, we didn't cross a line here, we stepped right up to it. And by constructing the investigative pieces as almost detective stories, it really riveted.
It gets the people you want to hear from the most when you want to hear from them. And that's always been a 60 Minutes hallmark.
In his other grand jury that will likely be dismissed this week, the independent counsel's been targeting people you've probably never heard of.
Later, veteran news people like Morley Safer, Ed Bradley, Andy Rooney, and Diane Sawyer would sign on to the show.
You knew you were part of an institution. Most of the mail we got this week was about the University of Texas student who was accused of child abuse and then cleared by a grand jury. So that you always had a sense of respect for what they'd done long before you got there.
Since its inception, 60 Minutes has set the standard for all news magazine shows that came after, changing the way viewers digest news with its mix of hard-hitting investigative pieces with a side of celebrity, by being first on countless stories and even helping to change the course of history with its in-depth, top-notch reporting.
It wasn't until those writers appeared on 60 Minutes that the world began to hear from them that they had seen Armstrong doping and that they too had participated in what the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency has called this systematic fraud.
It can do pieces about rare art. It can do pieces about Buddhist monks, up in some Trappist monastery in the mountains of Nepal. It can do whatever it damn well feels like at reasonably impressive length because the audience is coming to that show.
It was a fascinating program, and it's still, as I speak, 50 years later, has the integrity and the seriousness that makes it the best news program on broadcast television. It has remained very attuned to its mission. 60 Minutes in 2018 is very much what it was in 1968.
If 1968 was our moment of truth in terms of world events, so too was the role that television played in our lives that year. From escapist comedies to hard news, from the voice of counterculture to the showcase for the trendsetting, TV did more than entertain. It helped us cope. Something it probably never intended, but a role it will probably always fill. That'll do it for us today. I'm Ellie Pai Hong. As we leave, one last look back at television in 1968.